The other good schools also there actually more
once the sun comes up,
Hello everyone, welcome to Reef Fish and Friends. Don't you like my decorative jewelry here? Some of you, who has a glass? You're saving the environment, so you got a raffle ticket and you're going to win a prize. Those of you that aren't familiar with this, if you have one of our Reef glasses, the wine glass or the Pilsner glass, and you bring it to Fish and Friends, then you get a raffle ticket and you get to win something if your name is drawn. So I am going to have Carolyn reach in there and pull.
My. Well, whoever wins, I hope you love it, whatever it is.
Okay. David Dimmel. David is going to win one of our Reef notebooks.
Oh, nice.
It's a very nice hardcover, blank pages. Congratulations.
Nice job.
I know we have some announcements. Ellie, are you doing announcements? Lad, you're doing announcements. Okay.
I had slides for this.
Oh.
I was going to wait till we got started.
Oh, do you want me to announce you then?
Sure.
Okay. I'm sorry. No. I know most of you know Lad for many, many years. First of all, before I start, how many of you have never been to Reef Fish and Friends?
Welcome.
Welcome. Excellent, excellent. Well, we hope you come back. We have been in existence, not Reef. Reef's been in existence a lot longer, but Reef Fish and Friends was started in March of 2009. And every year we have done this for 11 months out of the year. We've only missed a couple of months, one to the hurricane and one to the presidential election. And I won't say any more on that one. But tonight we have our Director of Special Projects as our guest speaker. And I know you know him as the lionfish guru, and he's so active in the community with research and working with invasive species, not just the lionfish. But there's some interesting things about Lad that maybe you don't know. Did I hear you say uh-oh?
I gotta go.
He has served as a U.S. delegate on the Binational Commission on Marine Protected Areas with South Africa. He's piloted deep worker submersibles to assess fish assemblages at depths over 500 feet. And he's discovered and described new species of fish from the Gulf of Mexico. As a U.S. Coast Guard licensed captain and a dive instructor with over 10,000 dives, he has been recognized as NOAA Environmental Hero and an Orbis Sea Hero. Lad's current focus on invasive lionfish includes serving on numerous federal and international panels and working groups, and working with major media and co-authoring over 20 peer-reviewed papers on the issue. He lives on his 54-foot motor sailor and dives in his spare time. I don't know how he has any spare time. Anyway, Lad, it's all good.
Thank you.
Nancy,
You're welcome.
good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As Nancy said, thanks for coming to Fishing Friends. This is a monthly, second Tuesday of every month event that we have free. And we have some great guest speakers. They're a little short this month, so that's why you got me. But typically the way this works is we have this great open house, hors d'oeuvres, thanks to everybody that brings some snacks for everyone to munch on. It's a great social time for us in the community to get together, and for those of you that aren't part of the community that are visiting to come join in, and this is a way we connect, our social time. And then of course we have a talk. But before we get started on the talk, we typically do community announcements. So a couple slides that I put in. First of all, we have finalized our Derby series dates for Lionfish for this year. And we've added a few, Miami this year, Jacksonville. But the first event is coming up the end of March here in Key Largo. So keep your ears open for that. We have another Fishing Friends. We'll give you another reminder on that. But we're excited that Whole Foods is going to sponsor the whole series this year. So very excited about that. I did some browsing on the internet and saw that we also have coming up on February 20th a workshop on how to control and remove iguanas. So if you want to learn how to catch, I don't know if they do cook and eat like we do with lionfish, but anyway, great workshop on iguanas coming up. We also have some special guests here tonight. This is, I think, maybe the second Fishing Friends we've had in this new interpretive center. And for those of you that don't know, the images on here were donated by Steve Frank, but they were individual images. And Jim Hillam actually did all the blending work to convert this into one large mural that goes from the shoreline all the way around through patch reefs, offshore reefs, and artificial reefs. And Jim is here tonight. And he is going to be at Sotheby's down in Isla Mirada on Thursday night for an art show. So if you want to say a word or two about that, I
Sure.
will let you, Jim.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Like Glad said, I got involved helping to produce this piece of art here. And my first trip to the Keys ever was to come and install this in August. This is my 5th trip now. So I kind of like it.
Welcome.
And also, while we were down here, we got a chance to look around, and what I do is produce marine art and sell it in galleries, as well as get involved with some other pretty special projects like this. So while we were down here in August, we were really lucky to connect with a local gallery who wanted to host us there. And over the next couple of trips that we did in November and December, we put together a show at Sotheby's Gallery in Isla Mirada, which basically took over one of their largest galleries there. And we just had our first opening there on Friday. And we also wanted to do something for Reef, so we organized this event. It's kind of thrown together at the last minute. We didn't have a lot of time to get invitations out. But this coming Thursday the 15th from 6 to 9, we are inviting everybody to come to Ocean Sotheby's. And any sales that we have at the gallery, we will donate 15% to Reef, as well as donate some work from the gallery and from me that can be either given away there or auctioned or used as a fundraising event for Reef later on at their discretion. If you're available on Thursday night, please come down and join us. We will have some music and some wine and cheese and good friends. In fact, is there anybody that knows that they can make it, so we have an idea of how many people may show up? Great start, really great start. And bring some friends. That's a benefit for some really good folks here. We support several different nonprofits. It's a really important part of everything that we do. It's part of reaching people with outreach. It's all about what we are in the ocean for. So please come down and join us.
Thank you so much. Allison, you had an announcement?
Yes, so for those of you who are new, pretty much every month we give a free fish ID class here in the new Interpretive Center. So our next fish ID class is going to be next Tuesday at 7 o'clock here. And we're going to be talking about triggerfish and boxfish, so pretty cool presentation. It's free, so come and learn about the fish and get involved in going out and snorkeling and diving and writing down what you're seeing and putting it into the Reef database.
Great. Very good. David, you have an announcement?
Yes, the Ocean Life series continues on February. It's on Friday night at the Murray Nelson Center, mile marker 102 on the Bay side. It's a partnership between the Friends of Key Largo Cultural Center and the FIU, and every month an FIU scientist comes down during the wintertime and talks about ocean life. This month it's on coral reefs. It's Dr. Mauricio. Dr. Mauricio Rodriguez Lanetti, Associate Professor, Department of Biology Sciences at Florida National University. It's a 7 p.m. event with a 6 p.m. social hour beforehand. It's free and open to the public. And bring friends. Oh yeah, and Reef interns are allowed to come make announcements if they want.
Speaking of Reef interns, Jack Fishman, past Reef intern. What you got?
Hi, my name's Jack. I work at Rainbow Reef Dive Center. For those who may or not be familiar, are locals here. We're starting a new official program that every 4th Friday of the month we dedicate it to the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, not only for our customers to experience some of the staff and fish heads that you guys are, to come learn about fish, but we're also going to honor every single person who's a local and a valued Reef member to come on our boats at minimal cost. So that would be $50 to $55, which is our locals price. And the 4th Friday of the month, we want to create a safe and fun atmosphere for you guys to come together and do some fish surveys with some cool people, and a lot of staff and interns, and just anyone who wants to go diving, we'll take care of you guys.
Jack was a past Reef intern. When were you an intern?
2015.
2015. Went on to work at Rainbow Reef, and he's going to be leaving us the end of this week.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, to go to work for Patty. It's like their big time conservation program.
Where?
We're really proud of
Patty
him.
headquarters.
Where is it going? Which?
California?
California.
He'll be back. Congratulations. Good luck. And of course, we have a whole suite of interns every semester that come help us do what we do, and we wouldn't be able to get half of the work done without them.
75%.
75%, sorry. And we have 4 new interns here. See what I mean? So why don't all 4 of you come up and you can introduce yourselves and tell us what 75% you do.
We don't do 25.
Hey, we're really excited to have you here.
Yeah.
You go, you go.
Damaris, you go first.
I'm Damaris.
Say where you're from and what you studied in school.
Okay, yeah. I grew up in Idaho, but go to school and live in New York now. Liking this break from the cold, and I'm an environmental and urban studies major. So learning a lot of good stuff here at Reef.
Hi everyone, my name's Laura. I'm from Miami and I just graduated from the University of Florida in December. Go Gators. And I am really looking forward to being involved in education here at Reef.
I'm Gabby. I'm from Kansas City. I just graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I also just did my dive master on Utila. So I'm excited to be here and get into marine conservation.
My name is Christina. I actually studied industrial design and graduated back in 2014. And so I come from a design background, and I'm here doing some graphic design work, and basically just seeing how design and marine conservation can overlap.
And just got certified here.
Yeah, just got certified. 75%. I won't forget. All right,
Any other, Ellie, you have an
Just
announcement?
really super quickly,
Okay.
we just threw a whole ton of dates at you, Reef events that are upcoming. We have a schedule of the next 3 months worth of events that we're putting on, including the diving with Rainbow Reef and other opportunities. So please take a schedule when you leave if you'd like. Hopefully it's an easier way to remember what's going on. So,
Great idea.
or take a picture.
All right, any other community announcements? All right, on with the show, right? This could be a record-breaking crowd for this topic. Allison said, sex on the reef. No, it's love on the reef. But since Valentine's Day is tomorrow, guys, everybody owes me now that I reminded you. Those Valentine's gifts.
It's his birthday tomorrow.
Really? John, born on Valentine's Day. Good for you. I thought we could put a little romance into our talk for tonight. So I want to talk about some of the crazy things that happen out on the reef related to reproduction and courtship and all that good stuff. Some of this stuff is amazing things you'd be lucky to find, and some of these things are things you can find every day when you're out there on the reef if you know what to look for. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. So if anybody has any crazy stories to throw in as we go through this, feel free, or questions. But let's start out with corals. So if you've ever wondered, when you sit there and you look at, big, beautiful coral reef and all these massive structures, how they got there to start with. It's not like a tree that drops a seed right there on the ground and it starts to grow. There is a very predictable reproductive cycle that the corals engage in. And it's also something that you can go out and see on your dives late in the summer. And it's called coral spawning. So what we have corals releasing small bundles. Some corals are both male and female. The bundles contain sperm and eggs, and they release these into the water column. They drift up to the surface, break apart, and then the sperm and eggs fertilize those bundles from other corals. They can't fertilize themselves. And then we have some corals that are actually female corals releasing the eggs, and male corals releasing sperm into the water. They get together and mix. But the neat thing about it is that it happens with a frequency and timing that you can set your watch by. For these big boulder corals, 8 days after the full moon in either August or September, depending on when that full moon lands. And you can go out there and you can see these big star coral mounds like this all at once, late at night, like 11:30 at night, just releasing masses of eggs. It's like an underwater snowstorm. Anybody recognize him? Slate. That's Slate. Actually, I believe Slate was one of the first people in the Caribbean, in the Western Atlantic, to go out and document the coral spawning on the reefs here in Key Largo. Way back in the late 80s, if I remember right. He was out there watching this.
And a quick side note, I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina originally. I've been here 40-some years now. The lady who was a marine science biologist, Elena Zamont, was a teacher that accurately predicted this. And she is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So I thought I'd throw that in.
North Carolina.
That's it.
Yeah. So it is really neat. So I would put it on my calendar, look at when the full moon falls in August. And if it's an really early full moon, maybe look at the September full moon. But 8 days after that, plan on going out on a night dive, late at night. The dive operators plan special dives for that, and go out and watch this, because this is how corals get their start. These egg bundles go up into the water, break apart, get fertilized, drift around, and then settle back down somewhere else to start growing. So it's a really neat, interesting phenomenon. How many in here have seen that? Very few.
Yeah.
So put it on the bucket list. Seriously, it is one of the most interesting, greatest dives I've ever done. And I've done it many times. All right. Another one of those things that kind of sits on the bottom most of the time. Sponges. Sponges also reproduce in a manner similar to those corals. These are those big barrel sponges, scientifically called Zestrospongia, and the male sponges put out sperm, the female sponges put out eggs, and when they do, these big, huge barrel sponges, just like the one you're looking at, just spew this stuff into the water. Now, we have a lot of these sponges on the deeper reef, not as much way up in the shallows, but out there about 40 to 60 feet at the top of the reef line. And once one of them starts to spawn, they all start spawning. And the whole reef for a few hours is nothing but these giant sponges just billowing sperm and eggs out of them. The timing on this isn't quite the same as the timing with the corals, but typically around May or June, somewhere in there, you're likely to see this. So if you're ever out on the reef and you see one of those big sponges that looks a little bit odd, swim down and take a closer look, and it may be the sponges starting to spawn. Those are the big Zestrospongia, the big, huge barrel sponges, but other sponges also spawn. You may recognize that. It's like a little boring sponge, small patch that you would see out on the reef. Once in a while, you'll dive along the reef and you'll see one with this mesh-like net covering over it. Those are eggs. So that sponge also spawns, but instead of spawning the eggs up into the water to disperse, the eggs kind of lay across the top of the sponge. So these are sponge eggs from this little boring sponge. But it's really neat to keep your eyes open. Anytime you see something that doesn't quite look right, go down and take a close look. And there's a chance you're watching some good, interesting reproductive activity. All right, those corals and sponges are fun to watch, but they don't move around much. Anybody recognize that? Sea cucumber. It's nice and cute and cuddly, right? Actually, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Because when the sea cucumbers spawn, they do something really interesting. Normally, they lay kind of flat on the bottom. They don't move around much. But when they spawn, they rear up like a snake, like a cobra, off the bottom. It's unbelievable how they're able to do it. And again, the males put out the sperm, the females put out the eggs. And if you want to know what that looks like in real life, like that. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So that's pretty rare occasion. We don't see this very often. But if you ever do see a sea cucumber rising up off the bottom, get ready, because they're about to start spawning like that. And it's interesting. Skip has done a lot of work with diadema, and he's found that you can change the temperature to induce spawning with the diadema sea urchins. The same thing with sea cucumbers. So in aquaculture, when they're trying to raise these, all they do is they lower the temperature 5 degrees, wait for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then they raise the temperature 5 degrees. And by doing that, they can get these things to spawn on demand. So temperature change is what cues in that reproduction. All right, one of my favorite little organisms. This is not an organism that you'll be able to see with your naked eye. It's a tiny little thing about as big as a flea. It's called an ostracod. You probably heard of copepods before, which are all over the oceans, popular food. The whales and whale sharks and everything feed on copepods. This is a relative of that. They have a small little shell. So imagine something about as big as a flea with a hard shell opening on it, and various different body parts. This is what it looks like, so it gives you a size scale. So that's a millimeter in size up there on the top left. And these are individual ostracods. And they're very unique in that most of the time they're buried in the sand around the reef. So where you have a shallow patch reef and a good sandy bottom around it, like over here by that elkhorn coral where you have that sand and seagrass, you have ostracods buried down in there in the daytime. At night, they come out, and that's when they feed, and certain nights they actually spawn. And when they spawn, they leave a bioluminescent trail in the water. So the males put out a little bioluminescent dot. This is the underside. You can see the mouth is here. This is basically the nose, the rostrum of the ostracod. And through pores in the nose, they put out this little bioluminescent fluid, and they leave dots in the water column as they come up. This is the kind of reef that you would see it on, so a shallow patch reef with sand and seagrass around the side. And this is an artist's depiction of what it would look like. You have these little dots starting at the bottom and evenly spaced out going up towards the surface. And what's happening is the males are leaving these little bioluminescent trails to attract the females. And the females see the bioluminescent trail and swim over, and that's when they reproduce. It gets more interesting than that, though. Because there are other males that don't want to go through the whole energy of releasing this bioluminescence and risk. Imagine what happens if you're this male releasing this light, saying, here I am, here I am. You have a really good chance of getting eaten. You know, it's waving a sign to the other fish to come over. So there are other males that sneak in and spawn, but they don't release the bioluminescence. So they call those sneakers. Yeah, man, they're still alive. But it's really interesting that this is another event that you can go out and see. It happens on the waxing moon for about 7 nights, about 45 minutes after sunset. So that means there's no moon that's up yet. It's dark. And about 45 minutes after the sun goes down, you start to see this bioluminescent activity. And it just happens all around the reef at the same time. The reason most people don't see it is because it's not out on the main reef. It's not out here. It's over there around the seagrass and the sand on that shallow patch reef. But if you want to see a light show, go out there, turn your light off, 45 minutes after dark on the waxing moon, and just watch this incredible display that happens.
Have you seen it?
I've seen it in a number of places, and it really is amazing. One thing I equate it to, you remember the old World War II movies where the bombers were flying over? I guess they weren't bombers, but they drop out all the parachutists, and you just see a whole line of parachutes coming from each plane. Well, put that in reverse, and this is a whole line of light just lighting up in these strings coming up off the bottom all over the whole reef. It's really, really neat. There are a few dive shops in other parts of the Caribbean that have started advertising ostracod dives. So for about 7 nights, for 1 week, each month, you go out and you sit in the seagrass right next to the reef, turn out the light, and you just wait, and then this whole light show comes on. Really neat stuff. So I encourage you to go look for that.
How long will it last?
That's a great question, Betty. It lasts about 20, 30 minutes or so. And then I guess they wear themselves out. So. But then they start over the next night. So.
Are they all the same color? The lights?
Yeah, it's kind of a bluish greenish bioluminescent dot. Interesting though, there are many different species of ostracods, and depending on where you are in the Caribbean, the pattern that you see is probably going to be different. Some places will have a very rapid dot pattern. Some will be slower and further spaced apart. There's a really interesting paper, scientific paper, looking at all these different patterns. It was done out of UC Davis a number of years ago. So if you're interested, let me know and I can find that paper for you. Yes?
The ones that have risen through the water column like that, after they get up there and they do their thing, do they go back down?
Yes, exactly. Once they're done, and each of these might go like this one, about 6 or 7 dots up, maybe 3 or 4 feet up, and then they just kind of stop and they will go back down to the sandy bottom. Yep. Unless they get eaten. All right. Okay, so those are really cool things to look for, but my heart really goes with the fish. I'm a fish guy. How many of you know what that one is? Yeah, sailfin blenny, right. That's a male sailfin blenny. Great character on the face. These are little guys. You find these down on the small, kind of barren, what used to be live coral, but dead coral clumps in the sandy bottom next to the reef. This is a female sailfin blenny. And this guy is always on the lookout for her. And when there are two in the same vicinity, get ready for a display. The reason they got their name is because of this giant sail, this huge dorsal fin that comes up across the back. And the way they use that is very interesting. So I have a little video clip. I hope this is going to work. So you see? So why in the world is that sailfin blenny doing this little dance with the dorsal fin? It's trying to attract the female. Normally, where you have one male, and there's the female, like, oh, yeah, whatever. Big deal. But where you have one of those males and a female, you typically have others around. And the males will start late in the afternoon, let's say a couple hours before sunset. The males will start doing this dance. And one will go up and dance. Sometimes they come out of their hole a few feet up into the water, raise and lower, jiggle their pectoral fins around, and they get to the top of the dance and they dive back in their hole. And then the male over there will do a dance. And then a male over there does a dance. And the female this whole time is just watching to see who the best dancer is. And once she decides, she will leave her hole, swim across the bottom, go down inside the same hole as the male, disappear, and the male's still there in the hole with his head sticking out. And if you watch closely, you'll see the male just go into this violent shaking. Don't know what's going on there. And then the female comes out and goes back to her hole. And what happens is the female goes in the hole, lays the eggs, the male fertilizes them, the female leaves, but the eggs stay in the male's hole. And then after all that's done, female sings. But that's another thing to look for, especially on a dust dive. Those late afternoon dust dives are so good. Look for the male sailfin blennies doing their little spawning dances, and then just lay down in the sand and be quiet and watch. And if you look closely, you'll find a female around there somewhere. And hopefully you'll see the spawning activity. Similar to the sailfins, anybody know this one? It's a little
Is it a pike?
pike blenny. Yep. This is a pike blenny, and they're tiny. They're smaller than a pencil, like a coffee stirrer size, but the same habitat that you see the sailfins in. Very small, thin. Doesn't look like much right there, but these critters, when they get into little mating tips, they get ferocious. So this tiny little fish gets extremely aggressive. And they come out and the males do battle with each other and all over females. I just don't know what it's like. But I have another video just to give you an idea. There's a sailfin. Look at this.
Wow.
This tiny little fish as big as a coffee stirrer. And if you carry a mirror with you in your BC pocket, you can put a mirror out in front of one of these and they will come out and they'll attack the mirror, trying to chase it away.
The sailfins do that too, though.
Yeah, look at that. Yep, see there's another one here. So you see a little bit of aggression going on there between those sailfin blennies. Yep. So not all is happy, lovey-dovey out on the reef. There's a lot of aggression that happens out there sometimes. This fish you may be more familiar with. Sergeant Major. They're all over the wall over there, right? And typically that's how you see them. Up in the water column, picking particles out of the water. They're plankton feeders. If you see Sergeant Majors near the bottom, go down and take a close look. Often you'll see them start to take on this purplish, darker appearance. And if you look closely, right under them, you'll see a patch. See that patch all around behind them? It has a purplish haze. Those are eggs. So unlike many fish that broadcast their eggs into the water, these damselfish lay their eggs on a hard surface of the bottom. And if you see that very dark Sergeant Major, you see the purple patch, swim down and take a close look, and you can see the individual eggs, a little bit smaller than a BB, but still visible, and you can get a close look at those. And what's happening is the male cleans off a spot on the bottom, the female lays her eggs on the bottom, like this, and then the male has guard duty. The female just leaves and says, I'm done. The male has guard duty and will guard those eggs for about 5 to 7 days until they finally hatch. Uh-oh. Your update is ready. Oh, we start like, hold on back tomorrow. All right. So it's one of the only times that you will see sergeant majors near the bottom and being really territorial and defensive. But after the eggs hatch, they're on their own, so they don't do much. Other fish actually take care of their eggs a little better than that.
Maybe you better do the other.
Maybe I better do that. Okay. Anybody recognize that fish?
That's your favorite.
Yellow-headed jawfish. Yeah, they're so great. They live in the sandy bottom, down in a hole. They hover up above the hole and pick stuff out of the water. If you see a field of those jawfish out in the sand, look for some that have the jaws somewhat extended. And what you might be lucky enough to see would be a jawfish incubating the eggs in its mouth. So rather than laying the eggs on the surface or down inside a hole, like those sailfin blennies did, the jawfish actually hold the eggs in their mouths. And again, it's the male. Female just lays the eggs. The male gets all the work here. But the male will hold those eggs in its mouth, again, for about 5 to 7 days. You can tell as they mature, they change color and get this steely coloration until they're ready to hatch. You can see each of these are little eyeballs inside those eggs ready to hatch. And then once they hatch, those individual little larval fish just swim out into the water.
Does he eat the whole week?
Occasionally. That's a great question. Does he eat the whole week? Once in a while, they'll go back in the hole, kind of deposit the eggs down there, and then come back out. But it's pretty rare for that to happen. What you might see is you might see the jawfish spit the eggs out and suck them back in again immediately. And what they're doing is they're kind of changing the position of the egg mass and aerating them a little bit. So it's more common to see that, but they can set them down, but it doesn't happen much. So look for those eggs in the jawfish. That's quite a way to take care of your young.
Oh, how did you get that picture?
I didn't. Somebody else did. But these are one of my favorite fish. You don't see them like that very often, but you see them like this. They look like a little blenny on the bottom, but they're not really a blenny. It's a family of fish called dragonets. So you can see the sandy bottom here. You can see the grains of sand. So it's not a very big fish. It's about like this. Similar to a goby or a blenny, but look at the head. It's kind of smushed flat. It has these weird little lips out on the end here. Ellie's in the background going like this. That's the underwater signal for dragonet. But the male dragonet moves slowly across the bottom, and it has this big, beautiful foredorsal fin that it raises up and then lowers down. And again, that's to attract the female. So they just kind of scoot slowly around the bottom. And I think I have a little video clip of these guys to give you a better look. So look at that really strange, odd face on that fish. Kind of a smush snout. But this is a favorite fish to look for in this type of habitat. You can see how they raise the dorsal up, move a few inches, and then pause again. And again, late in the afternoon, if you're able to find a dragonet doing this, follow it around slowly. And if you're lucky, you'll see a male and a female get up together next to each other. There's a little bit of courtship that happens, and then they'll move up into the water. They just kind of rise up off the bottom and go for a few feet, moving up above the bottom and forward. The male releases the eggs, the sperm, the female releases the eggs, and they break apart when that happens. But it's a really neat fish to find and to watch for that spawning behavior. Another spawning behavior that's pretty common that you can see on a fairly regular basis, pretty much every night, are the hamlets. Now, hamlets are just a really interesting group of fish. So they're related to the sea basses, like a small sea bass, we'll say about 5 inches long or so. You can tell that heavy jaw, just like a grouper. They are at the same instant male and female. So we call that a simultaneous hermaphrodite. So this fish, this individual fish, is capable of reproducing as a male or as a female. It can do either one. It can't self-fertilize them. So it has to find another hamlet somewhere out there on the reef. But again,
So how do they know who to look for?
How do they know who to look for?
Well, you need one of each, and they're both.
They're both. They're both. All you got to do is find another hamlet. It doesn't have to be the opposite sex.
Right.
It already is. Automatically.
Somehow that's strange to me.
It's so easy.
Who's gonna be the guy, who's gonna be the girl?
Well, that's a great question. So, if you're a fish, this is important. Who's going to be who, right?
Yes, that's a question.
Because egg production is very expensive. It takes a lot of energy to produce a high quality egg. Sperm production is just DNA with a little string on it, right? So you can produce millions of sperm very easily and cheaply, energy-wise. But to produce eggs, that's a lot. So it's more advantageous to spread your genes as a male. A lot easier, doesn't take as much energy. So trying to decide who's going to put out the eggs, that's a big question.
They play a hand of poker first?
Well, what they do, I actually have a little video. Hold on. Hold on. So again, late in the afternoon, you see a little courtship, 2 hamlets getting closer together, and keep your eyes on them. Usually you just see one like this, but when you start to see 2 together in that afternoon, watch them. Hold on. It's coming. See, there's 2. They come together, wrap around, and right now, at that instant that they break apart, one of them has just released eggs and the other one has just released sperm. So they break apart. And then a few minutes later, they come back together again. Same thing, but this time they swap. So now this one releases the eggs, this one releases the sperm. And they trade off back and forth 3 or 4 times, so they both get a chance to equally contribute. Right?
How do they know? Which one's going to?
That is a great question. How do they know? And I don't know the answer to that. My guess is there's probably some chemical signal that says, okay, I'll be female first, you be the male. There's probably that, but I'm not sure what the answer is. Yeah, Jim.
Could you play that again?
Yes. We need a credit card first.
You want to turn the lights down?
Yeah. Okay, here we go. So nothing going on yet.
Look at the color patterns on the fish.
Yes. Those are probably 2 different species that we're spawning here. Looks like a barred on the right and maybe a
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
So you got some interracial stuff going on too. They just really swing.
Yes. So hamlets also hybridize. There are different species of hamlets that hybridize freely. I mean, it's a crazy group of fish. So, but you can see this almost every day on the reef. All right. We're going to finish with the relative of the hamlets. Wonderful, wonderful, amazing fish. This is a grouper called a Nassau grouper. And Nassau grouper are one of those amazing fish. They're one of the most friendly fish out on the reef. They'll swim right up to you. You can go under here. You can scratch it on the chin. You can pet it down the back. There are grouper at dive sites around the Caribbean that have been named because every dive they just love to come up and interact with the divers and follow you around, just like a puppy dog. They are also one of those groups of fish that aggregate to reproduce. So unlike the hamlets, one fish and another fish, we have grouper getting together by the thousands at a specific time every year to reproduce at the exact same location. And right now is when this is going on. It's after the winter full moon, and we have had a project going on in the Cayman Islands since about 2001 or 2, studying the grouper aggregation there and helping advise the government on what's going on with that aggregation. Because what happens when you get 5,000 of these big fish at a timed location every year at the same place? That's right. The fishermen also go there because they know they can get a huge harvest. Well, unfortunately, it makes these fish very vulnerable, and in most of the Caribbean, they have been fished out. Nassau grouper have been protected in the Keys since 1990, and we still don't know of any aggregations like this that come together because they were wiped out well before that. So there are very few of these aggregating sites left. One of them is, this one actually, is in the Cayman Islands off of Little Cayman, and we've been doing work there for a number of years, every year going back and documenting what's going on, and we've learned so much about this aggregation. One of the things we learned is that usually Nassau grouper looks like this, kind of that camouflage pattern. But at the spawning sites, they change color. They get a light belly, they get very, very dark like this, and then when they're ready to spawn, you see this very distinct bicolor phase. Looks nothing like this fish, but it is, same fish. So they change color, they change their mood when they get together to reproduce, and it is an amazing sight. And again, I have a little video we'll play.
This just happened last week with Steve.
Yes, yep. Just last week, we had work going on in the Cayman Islands. In fact, this is video from that. Oh, wow. So first of all, it's typically a little bit deeper in exposed promontories where you have the reef projecting out, so that's why it's a little darker. They actually like to get together and spawn late in the afternoon into the evening. And when we first found this aggregation, there were about 3,000 or 4,000 fish on it. It's been protected due to the work that's been done. It's been protected now for over 8 years, and we're starting to see fish from the first year of protection that were spawned then coming back. They've matured now and are coming back. So I haven't heard the exact estimates, but the number of fish at this aggregation site is going way up due to the protections. And you can see those fish milling together and then just rushing up into these big spawning rushes towards the surface. And that's the only time of the year these fish reproduce. That one time of year around that full moon. And so it's critical to protect these locations for that activity. Because if we don't, and they get fished out, those grouper aren't going to reproduce any other time or place.
I'm sorry. But has anybody figured out why? We have seen the groupers flash their mating colors in every month of the year at the full moon in different places of the island. They're not aggregating, but they'll play around with each other. Yeah. And I'm not sure if they're teenagers, maybe they're
practicing, right?
No. Has anybody figured that out?
I haven't heard that answer. So Christy and Bryce are our lead scientists on that. They'd probably be the best ones to ask. Fred, did you have a question too?
Basically the same question, about whether anybody has observed these other colorations in the Keys with the grouper.
Skip might have.
Yeah, you didn't mention that the groupers are also protogynously hermaphroditic, and they change sex from female to male. The red grouper in particular around age 7 to 10.
Yep.
And one of the things that makes them particularly vulnerable is that the males are the larger, more aggressive fish in the pod, so to speak. And if you fish that particular aggregation, you catch the males first. And then the females can't successfully spawn without the males. They don't change instantaneously like the synchronously hermaphroditic hamlets do.
Right.
And so that holds, all of the grouper species have to be protected and managed with their phorogynous sexuality taken into account.
And fishing regulations really come into play then, because so often we set a minimum size limit, but you can keep all the big ones.
Yeah,
But if you're doing
exactly.
that, you're selectively removing all the males, like you said. Yep, really important. All right. That was the last slide. I hope everybody enjoyed that. There's lots more to see out there, so keep at it, and happy Valentine's Day tomorrow. Feel free to stick around a little bit.
Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere yet. Boss's phone announcement. I have a couple of announcements here.
Wonderful.
I know many of you know Martha Klitsky, our Director of Operations, and I think did I? Yes, I did her. The good news is she has been wonderful for Reef. I'm going to tell you how many hats this woman has worn since she joined us in 2011, and you will be amazed that she ever was able to accomplish anything. The bad news is she's leaving us. She's moving back to Chicago with her husband and family, and her last day will be a week from Friday, and here she is. But while she's coming up here, I just want to tell you, just listen to this, what her responsibilities are. Her primary responsibilities are finance, office/facilities management, long-term planning, public relations, advancing conservation partnerships, development for program expansion. She also oversees many of Reef's extension programs based at headquarters, including field survey trips, the Reef Store, the Marine Conservation Internship Program, and the Explorers Education Program.
Wow.
How does she have time to sleep and raise a family?
I was gonna say, how many children?
She has 2, and we are going to miss her.
I was stepping next door, so I might have missed a little bit of that transition. But the exciting news for me and my family in the year ahead, we are moving to Chicago. We're starting fresh. My husband's family's from Chicago. They have a landscaping business there. So my husband's going to go back and take over the family business. We're excited despite how cold it is in Chicago. I've heard it's really cold there. I've never lived in a wintry northeastern state, so that'll be a transition.
You'll love it.
Right. People keep saying all these positive things, like there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad clothing. Which I don't know that that's completely true, but we're excited for the change. And looking at tonight, we have more than 70 people here tonight, between this room and the room next door, and it warms my heart to see how much this organization has grown, and the programs have grown, the staff has grown in the time that I've been here, and the time that I've spent with all of you. So I'm excited to see the continued success of Reef over the next few years, and I think Nancy said that my house will quicker than I thought it would, so my last day here at the Reef office will be next Friday, but I'll be continuing to work remotely with Reef through that transition. So until they have another person set up in this position, I'll be working remotely with the organization. So it's a delayed goodbye over time.
Wow, thank you.
I think we still have some beverages next door for a few minutes anyway. So thanks again for coming. I hope you